Welcome. This week, another special edition of our program focusing on the New York City mayoral race. Once again, it's a mayoral candidates forum that I moderated. This forum took place on Monday night, April 22nd, Earth Day, at Cooper Union's Great Hall. And so the topic, environmental sustainability and the future of New York, sponsored by the League of Conservation Voters. This is a 1-hour edit of an approximately 90-minute event. In alphabetical order by party, please welcome the candidates. The Republican primary candidates, Red Apple Group CEO John Catsimatidis, former MTA chief and former deputy mayor and budget director Joe Lhota, and George McDonald, president of the Doe Fund. The Democratic primary candidates are former Brooklyn councilman Sal Albanese, public advocate Bill de Blasio, controller John Liu, city council speaker Christine Quinn, and former controller Bill Thompson. And in case you didn't know who's who, see around the pillar. And the Independence Party nominee is Adolfo Carrión, former Bronx Borough president and urban affairs appointee in the Obama administration. Please welcome all the candidates. So to begin, does everyone believe, as a general principle, that man-made global warming is real and the city has a responsibility to consider carbon emissions in city policies? Could you please raise your hands if you agree with that statement as a general principle? One hand missing. Mr. Catsimatidis, do you want to say why?
I think the Earth has existed for billions of years, and I'm certainly concerned about global warming, but I think we have to really study it to see if it's a result of what we're doing.
So for the rest of you, is there a numerical goal that anyone would give for reducing carbon emissions from the city during your term? Mayor Bloomberg boasted just last week, as you probably know, that carbon emissions are down 16% in the last 6 years. Does everyone have a numerical goal or estimate of what would be realistic in the next 4 years? Mr. Albanese, you want to start?
Well, I'd like to see a 20% reduction beyond what Mayor Bloomberg has achieved during his tenure. And I've got a transportation plan which is very comprehensive, the only comprehensive plan out there, which basically includes fair tolling, which will actually impose tolls in areas where there are a lot of mass transit options, add tolls to those areas, and reduce tolls where there are a lot of mass transit options. And that would improve air quality, it would reduce congestion, and would make a big difference. We're also calling for an expansion of bike lanes in the city, and additional select bus services, particularly in areas that are underserved, so those people tend to travel by car. The objective is to get as many people out of their cars as possible. So I think that that would certainly go a long way to making our air quality better.
Thank you.
The legislation that we passed in the council with Mayor Bloomberg with the greening of the building codes, when it fully goes into place, and what the mayor talked about is the start of that, will be about a 30% reduction. It'll be equivalent, the reduction we'll achieve will be equivalent to the entire carbon footprint of the city of Oakland, California, just to give you the significance of it. Now, there's studies going on now looking, and this is further than any of our terms, into 2050. And some attempts in these studies would have the hope of reducing our carbon footprint by 80% by 2050. Now, we don't know if that's achievable, but that's where we need to be looking. That needs to be our goal, is to work with the folks who are doing those studies to get us there by 2050. And I'd like to try to achieve the 30% goal much earlier so we can expand from there.
And Mr. Albanese mentioned his traffic plan as a central way to get there for him. How about for you?
Traffic is certainly part of it, but we have to remember, and this is why when we did our legislation that creates the Oakland, California goal, it focused on buildings. Because although we do obviously have part of our carbon footprint from vehicles, most of it comes from the built physical space of New York. Now, new buildings being LEED certified, et cetera, that's all terrific, but most of New York is already built. So to really get to 80% in 2050, yes, it's going to have to include vehicles, but it's much more aggressively going to have to involve retrofitting new building materials and the physical built space of New York.
Mr. Lhota, how much do you agree with that, Mr. Lhota? And the stat that I have here from the sponsors is that buildings are responsible for 75% of carbon dioxide emissions in the city, and New York has been a leader on this. What would you do to ensure that the standards being set for green buildings are implemented, and anything else you want to say about your strategy or goal?
I actually believe that it's important to understand that New York has the lowest carbon emissions of any city in the country, and we are on the path of actually reducing it further, whether it's 30% or 80%. It is about the buildings. For the most part, because of our mass transit system and the number of people who take the mass transit, which goes up every single year, our carbon emissions is actually going down. We need to focus on the buildings, the renovation of our existing buildings, as well as using city planning as they go forward. I mean, everybody's losing sight of what they're talking about in Midtown East with the renovation of all of the buildings in Midtown East and making them taller. Each and every one of them will be energy efficient, in some cases self-sufficient. And I think it's a very, very important point to bring across. We do need to make sure, as the MTA has done, all of its buses are far and away advanced. It's got the best fleet in the world right now from a carbon emissions point of view. We need to do the same thing with our cars. We need to do the same thing with our taxis. For the life of me, I can't figure out why the mayor has decided on a taxi that's not energy efficient.
Mr. de Blasio, same question, basic strategies and numerical goals?
You know, there's so much to appreciate in the Bloomberg approach in Plan NYC, and I'm someone who's not been afraid to disagree with the mayor when I thought he was wrong. But in this front, I think he's been very much on the right path. What I would say in terms of goals is, I agree, start with the 30% and see if we can speed it up. But where I think we're going to have to do a lot more to address the reality that buildings are the core of the problem is not just incentivize building retrofit in a kind of minimalist way, but in a much more aggressive manner. Look what the city of Chicago has done to create a real financing mechanism that allows large-scale building retrofit. And by the way, not just for private buildings, for public buildings. You can say use the same methodology. Our great possibility in New York that makes us different from any other city is the thousands of buildings that make up the New York City Housing Authority alone, all of which over time should be retrofitted, plus the huge diversity of other government buildings. We can be a leader in this country in retrofit, but only if we have aggressive financing mechanisms. And I think the other piece of the equation is the city playing a much more aggressive role in facilitating alternative energy development here in the city, starting with public buildings.
Let me ask you a retrofit follow-up question, kind of, because the 1950s to 1970s buildings are often energy inefficient and they're undesirable for tenants anyway with low ceilings and old boilers. Would you allow them to be built higher, rebuilt higher, greater floor to area ratio, if they make them energy efficient? The preservation community doesn't like that, I believe, but environmentalists might. Any thoughts about where and when that trade-off works?
Well, just one comment. I want people to understand in terms of our public housing buildings, just this piece of the equation. You're talking about building stock that in some cases goes back 60, 70 years, in the majority of cases 40, 50 years. So this is where there's a desperate need for retrofitting, and for folks who obviously are dealing with very tough conditions to begin with, this would be part of also providing real economic opportunity for them as well. But I think in terms of the balance of preservationism and energy efficiency, environmentalism, I think we've done some great things in this city of striking a balance where we respect the need to protect at least facades and pieces of what makes a building special. But in the end, look, with all due respect to John Catsimatidis, global warming is here and now. It's an incredible danger to this city and this planet. And we, being one of the great metropolitan areas of the earth, have to lead the way and have to aggressively approach retrofit in every way we can.
Mr. McDonald, do you have something that's at the heart of your carbon reduction strategy?
Well, first I'd like to say, you know, at the Dauphin, we were a pioneer in collecting grease and turning it into biodiesel fuel. when we started collecting it, it was about 35 cents a gallon, and now it's close to $2 a gallon. And it also unclogs our sewers. So it serves and by the way, it also provides jobs. And all of this is about creating jobs first, using the human capital that we have in New York City, and then the investment of the financial capital to bring us to where it is we all want to be. So I think that incentives work in every area of life, and this is how we're going to progress now. We need, obviously, to address these issues, and they have to be economical in our approach to it, but it is our future.
Mr. Catsimatidis, to close the loop, would you not continue the things that the mayor has started, the current mayor, toward the 30% reduction goal and other things, considering your skepticism?
Let me set the record straight. I personally am not sure about global warming, but we are doing everything possible to go towards that. We are building a biodiesel facility in Brooklyn that's one of the largest biodiesel facilities in the country. So we're doing our part. We are doing our part in every respect. I believe we should move towards greater savings, greater carbon savings, but we have to be aware of cost of jobs. So I believe in doing it. We shouldn't take a chance that, it may be right or wrong. We should do it anyway.
Okay. How about nuclear energy's place in New York? Carbon-free energy, but with its own well-known risks. Is anyone here, raise your hands if so, is anyone here in favor of closing Indian Point? Raise your hand if you're in favor of closing Indian Point. Anybody? Speaker Quinn, how do we replace the energy?
Well, we replace energy in a number of different ways. One, we aggressively continue to do energy conservation. Two, just last week we passed legislation to do a study which will give us mapping around where we can tap into geothermal energy. Three, we need to continue to move forward on other types of alternative energy power in the city and really redouble our energy conservation. But I think the idea of moving New York City to the answer to being reliant on nuclear energy is something that just adds another unsafe, dangerous energy supply into a system when we want to be moving to cleaner, safer energy systems.
Mr. Liu, I want to give you a chance to talk about the heart of your carbon reduction strategy.
Sure. I guess that allows me to answer a little bit of the first question. I think that I think that Mayor Bloomberg's Plan YC has been in most cases in the correct direction. I don't think, though, that the city has taken advantage of enough of the retrofitting opportunities out there that could have paid for themselves easily with the savings in energy costs. I've got a proposal out there called Green Apple Bonds, where we could borrow money on behalf of the city, pay for the retrofitting of certain facilities that are publicly owned, and actually pay off the additional interest cost on this debt many times over with the savings in energy costs. The calculations are good, the numbers are there. The city should have been doing that much longer ago. And as far as our carbon footprint is significant. I'm not sure about the comparison to other major American cities. We might be more efficient in our transportation, but I think with our old buildings and aging infrastructure, I'm not quite sure that would be the case compared to other more modernized cities. I do think, though, as a city, we have a responsibility to go beyond our city. And for example, we have exercised and utilized our pension assets to leverage corporate governance reforms so that we can encourage global conscientiousness with regard to climate risk, and we've been a very full partner. I know Bill Thompson and we have been controllers and board members of Ceres, which is an international organization that tries to use institutional assets to fight climate change. To answer the question of nuclear energy, I think it's great for us to say, let's get rid of the nuclear power plants. But produce a huge amount of the electricity and the power that we in the metropolitan area do rely upon. So let's figure out how to speed up the geothermal sources. And there are ideas on how to harness the very fast current that we have in the East River and the Harlem River channels. Let's figure out how to get those turbines in there and tap into that renewable energy. But we've got to do it quicker, and we've got to have a comprehensive plan to start generating the electricity from those renewable sources before saying that we have to get rid of certain things, because unfortunately, our power consumption is increasing, and we still have to deal with that.
Thank you very much. On the turbines, has anyone read the Stanford study with a blueprint for an all-renewable New York State energy supply? I interviewed the lead author, and one key for him is offshore wind farms. Is anybody familiar with it? You're not familiar with the study?
Can I make a statement?
Mr. Catsimatidis?
We started 10 or 12 years ago. We put turbines in the East River. We had a joint venture for our store on Roosevelt Island. And it took them a few years, 3, 4, 5 years. Well, 12 years later, we are hardly producing enough energy to run the front end of the store.
So it's less
and
than
I think the
advertised.
technology has
All
to
right.
go a long way. The technology, this is the reality. Let's use some common sense. Everything, we can live in a dream world, but common sense is common sense. If it works, everybody loves it. But let's not live in a dream world.
Okay. Mr. Thompson, do you think that New York State could greatly expand offshore wind farms? And tell us anything that would be at the heart of your carbon reduction strategy.
I think that offshore wind farms, if you look at other places around the country, it has been successful in a number of different ways. It is worth trying in New York. Obviously, if you look at what's occurred in Long Island and the discussion over that, there's been some objection to the aesthetics. I think New York City probably is a perfect place to be able to blend the aesthetics as well as be able to look at the possibility of expanding wind power and the use of it in turbines in the city of New York. So yes, I would be in favor of it. When you look at reduction in carbon emissions, and it's one thing Bill de Blasio had mentioned it, but I believe that that's a place that New York City and New York City government and the buildings that we have should take the lead. It is a great opportunity to be able to lead by example, as they would say, to be able to reduce the emissions from our buildings, to be able to create greener facilities. But also, it is, if you look at New York, most of the materials that you are importing these days and bringing in from around the country and around the world, it's a great opportunity to grow jobs in the city of New York, to be able to have those jobs produce the materials that we need in New York City. So I think a combination, sure, of additional mass transit in a number of ways, but also being able to look at reducing our carbon emissions in retrofitting our buildings and be able to create the jobs that we need. It's a great combination.
And Mr. Carrión, the heart of your carbon reduction strategy?
Well, thank you, Brian. Let me...
Somebody has to go last.
Yes,
so.
yes. They say the last shall be first. That's biblical. Let me first thank you for this and for the opportunity. I think New York is in a very unique and historic position to lead in this area. Clearly, we have proven that we have a smaller carbon footprint than just about every major city on the globe, and we've made certain advances. The Plan NYC 2030 was an important step forward to look at how we can continue to reduce our carbon footprint, how we can create smarter buildings that are more efficient energy-wise. We've started the steps toward creating a smarter transportation system that's more efficient, smarter, more efficient fleets for our public agencies. I think we need to take a major leap forward with taxis. I think we need to continue to take a major leap forward with buses. I think that we need to work with the building industry, with the real estate industry, to look at new construction, let alone the retrofitting of the old old buildings that produce a lot of carbon. On the issue of wind turbines, hydro turbines, and the question of whether or not Indian Point should be closed. I think in an ideal world, we want to say, yes, we should work toward transferring to new, better, smarter, cleaner sources of energy. When I was at HUD, we instituted for the first geothermal, fully geothermal building on 29th Street and 1st Avenue. And the Secretary of HUD came, officials came, the mayor came, everybody celebrated. That building is now self-sufficient, so much so that it actually throws off energy into the grid and sells it back to the utility. My goal would be to ensure that New York City buildings are self-sufficient and producing enough energy that they can actually trade it off in the marketplace.
Thank you very much. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time on fracking because in most respects it's not directly a mayoral issue. But it is such a huge issue in the state right now that I just want to see if any of you think it is a mayoral issue, assuming there's no attempt to frack in the city's watershed. So assuming no attempt to frack in the watershed, is there any city natural gas policy or fracking policy that would be called for? Anybody? Mr. Albanese?
Well, I'm 100% opposed to fracking. As the mayor of the city of New York, I don't want any fracking anywhere near the reservoir because I'm responsible for 8 million people, 8
But
million
beyond
New Yorkers. Well, beyond that, I don't see any need for fracking here in the city or anywhere near the city.
Right, all right. Mr. de Blasio, anything that the mayor would have, because it's
This is
apparently
absolutely-
not, for now it's not happening near the city.
Well, it's absolutely a mayoral issue because we've all seen how promises made over the years, particularly by folks in the energy sector, are broken. And so I think, remember the BP spill and a lot of other things we've seen along the way? I think the mayor of New York City has to protect the watershed. The way to protect the watershed is not to just work around the edges, but a moratorium on fracking. I think the Assembly is exactly right. We need to stop it now. And we know the technology is safe. We know it's unproven. We know we don't have the enforcement mechanisms. So the mayor of New York City has to stand up on that. But one other point, on the previous point about the wind farms, here's the conundrum. I think a lot of us know we don't want fracking, and we want to move intensely away from the use of fossil fuels. That means we have to embrace alternative energy, even when it's not. But even when it's not convenient, and I say this with a sense of solidarity here, sometimes, something like the wind farms in Long Island Sound, there will be controversy, and you have to be careful about environmental impact, of course. But more urgently, if we're going to get to a real focus on renewable energy, we have to do it on a large scale. That's why we have to use our New York City resources. There should not be public buildings in this city that we're not looking for every way to convert to renewable energy, and we should be supporting large-scale development of wind farms in our area as well.
Right. And Speaker Quinn, one way that some activists say it is a mayoral issue pertains to pipelines that could bring natural gas into the city. Would you enable or go slow on natural gas infrastructure planned for the city? One thing that gets mentioned is the Spectra pipeline.
Well, look, I think you can't rush into something like the Spectra pipeline. So you have to do it extremely carefully. You have to make sure there's a real plan in place, that there's monitoring in place, that all of the concerns get to be aired out, and that we have real community input into how it gets done, when it gets done, and clear and transparent monitoring moving forward with something like that. So you can't rush into it, but I would not take it off the table.
All right.
Well,
Now,
Brian, on this,
go ahead. Mr. Liu, let him speak. John Liu, go ahead.
thank you, Brian. Obviously the renewable forms of energy need to be tapped much more by the city of New York, and I don't think that as a city we have made those kinds of investments. So certainly, if I had my druthers, I would make those investments from the city's point of view. And I don't think it can be said that it's not a mayoral prerogative, because I agree with what's been said already. You do have to protect the environment and certainly the drinking water supply for the people of New York City. And it should be about finding and tapping and harnessing the renewable forms of energy as opposed to trying to figure out how to pipe more gas into the city.
So would you rule out, or would anybody on the panel
so let me
rule
just say
out
that
the Spectra pipeline?
Well,
would
look,
anybody rule
I
it
just
out
wanted to say that you know, Chris said something about community review and input. I think at a recent meeting on the Spectrum Pipeline, there were, I think, 2 letters in favor of the Spectrum Pipeline, and something like 5,000 letters opposed to that. And you have to look at, number one, you know, this is building a natural gas pipeline under the most dense neighborhood anywhere in America. But you also have to look at the record of the company, which has had a number of violations, millions of dollars of penalties levied against it. So we got to look at the total outlook and see whether it actually makes sense for this particular company to build that pipeline
But you would
underneath
take a look
tens of
at
thousands.
it and also keep the door open for now. Do I understand you correctly?
Well, you know, again, I go back to the fact that we need energy, but on the other hand, this particular deal seems a particularly bad deal for the people of New York City.
All right, now,
The problem
either from,
with gas that nobody talks about is it has a tendency to explode. And putting it into a dense populated area, I think, is not smart.
thank you very much. And you got some applause from the crowd that time. So either from global warming or from whatever, Sandy and Irene, with their billions of dollars of damage and everything else, happened close together, and there is widespread concern that the flood zone is moving further inland. Mr. Lhota, what's your redevelopment strategy in flood zone areas? What would you do as mayor about land that we believe will probably be flooded again?
First and foremost, we need to separate what we do in Staten Island from what we do in the shores off of Long Island, the Rockaways in Brooklyn, and those parts of the city. In the Rockaways and in Brooklyn, we need to have a building code that allows the buildings to be high enough so that when the floodwaters come, just like they've done off the coast of the Carolinas, for the most part, think about the Rockaways, it's a barrier island, and we have a long history in this country of how to build homes on barrier islands to withstand the flooding that needs to go on. Out in Staten Island, it's a completely different type approach because of the marshlands. The people in Staten Island want to accept the program that the governor has put forward with the federal government of buying the property so that they can live somewhere else and letting the marshlands there continue to thrive, which will help in the long run of preventing the surge from happening. We also need to deal with Lower Manhattan. Lower Manhattan requires a concerted effort of the governments and the private sector to figure out what can happen. I was asked immediately after Sandy, can't you plug up the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel? Sure. 93 million gallons of water went into the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, and it became a drainage ditch. If that water didn't go in there, it would have gone into all the rest of the buildings into Lower Manhattan. We've got to find a way to protect Lower Manhattan. It doesn't necessarily need to be a wall, but there are various different ways that we can go about making sure that Lower Manhattan is habitable every winter, every time there's a storm. It's going to continue to happen, and we need to have a concerted effort all the way around.
What's one alternative to a wall?
One alternative to the wall, believe it or not, are all types of environmental as well as approaches that, where you build more marshland out at sea. One of the things that New York that used to save us in the past when the water surges came in, believe it or not, are oyster beds. At one point in time at the turn of the 20th century, we were loaded with oyster beds, and it helped in the process. We need to find natural ways to deal with natural disasters.
Does that mean moving development back from the shoreline as the only way to allow those marshlands to grow?
I'm not sure. I don't think it does require that to happen. Marshlands can be on either side, and it can also be farther out so that it gets captured sooner before it gets to Manhattan. We have a problem because our transportation system, our car-based transportation system, thanks to Robert Moses, surrounds the entire island. And it puts us at an awful disadvantage in trying to deal with this problem.
Mr. Thompson, do you like Governor Cuomo's downgraded buyout plan, offering post-Sandy values rather than pre-Sandy values to move some homes and businesses away from the shore?
Yes, I do. I think that as we've looked at people in Staten Island who have opted in, who have said that this is what they want, I think it makes sense. So, yes, I think that's a good idea. I think that creating and giving people the choice and giving communities the choice to be able to say, we don't want to live with this, I think that makes sense. I think if you look at the larger our response to Sandy. It really is looking at a not one-size-fits-all approach. If you look at, as you point out, at Staten Island, the response in Staten Island and how we rebuild, what materials we use to rebuild, so many things as we look at Lower Manhattan and other places. What code are we going to employ? How are we going to, our boilers, again, going to be in the basement along with the electrical panels? There's so many things that we have to look at and do things differently. I've argued that I believe that we need a deputy mayor, for infrastructure, because we need to coordinate and use the dollars that we're going to have better. But a lot of this is going to be staged over a period of time, done incrementally, but we have to do this smarter. So the use of wetlands and so many other things, use of barriers, all of that comes into play as we look to do things and rebuild smarter and better in the future.
Does anybody disagree with Governor Cuomo's new plan?
What?
Is there unanimity on that for the moment? Okay. Sal Albanese.
I have to point this out because one of the things that has happened here with Sandy is the fact that it demonstrates that we have a reactive government. I mean, for 10 years, the city of New York was warned by climate scientists that we were going to have a storm like Sandy, and nothing was done. No hearings were held. As a matter of fact, the New York Times, 6 weeks before the storm, had a front-page story from a Columbia climate scientist who pointed out exactly what would happen if we got hit with a storm like Sandy, and it happened 6 weeks later. So we've got to be more proactive. We've got to plan. We operate in a crisis mode, and I think that we have to plan not for 10 years ahead, but 100 years ahead, and look at the ways to preserve our coastline, natural barriers, artificial barriers. Everything is on the table, but let's plan. Let's not do what we did for the last 10 years and then act surprised when we were warned by so many different people. So let's become proactive as a city and as a government, and that's what I plan on doing.
New topic, parks. Our incredible urban density underscores the need for all New Yorkers to have access to open space. In Mayor Bloomberg's Plan YC 2030, he established a goal of no New Yorker living more than a 10-minute walk from a park. Hands up if that's a goal you would promise to renew. Everybody? That's everybody. Okay. Now, how do we get to quality parks everywhere? One way that some neighborhoods have been getting there is public-private partnerships, effective financing mechanism for large destinations like Central Park and Prospect Park. They have yet to bring critical resources to hundreds of neighborhood parks. Mr. Carrión, is there a way to leverage more private PPP financing for neighborhood parks in outer boroughs, or how else would your administration pay for parks?
I think there is a way to create these P3 models or apply them to all of the 5 boroughs and ensure that every park and every neighborhood across the city has a quality park. I think one of the goals that the mayor has to establish is that there should not be discrimination in the quality of parkland across the city. And that's very important. Every borough has industry. Every borough has a chamber of commerce. Every borough has industrial partners. Every borough has retail partners. I think all of those partners should be employed in ensuring the quality of the parks, the programming in the parks.
How do you get them to pay up? Is it the mayor's bully pulpit?
Well, I think, look, we've tried the business improvement district model for our commercial districts. I think there could be a park improvement type partnership with businesses, because they're stakeholders in the quality of the lives of the people and the children that are being raised in those neighborhoods. So I think we have to really think outside the box. The other thing, though, is that the city has to make a strong commitment to ensure quality parks in every single neighborhood. Where there is no wealthy partner, where there is no Central Park Conservancy, and when I was borough president of the Bronx, we had to take a larger share of our capital dollars and move them toward the parks, because we wanted to ensure that there was no difference between the folks who were living on Central Park West and Fifth Avenue and the folks living on Pelham Parkway.
All right. Mr. Thompson, you want to get in on financing?
Yeah, it is crucial that as we look at P3s, and they work in some of the parks, as you point out, in Central Park and Prospect Park and others, there's a constituency that wants to add money, that wants to help grow that. In neighborhoods across the city of New York, in poorer parks, it really is they're being treated as second-class citizens in those parks, and that is wrong, and we cannot allow that to continue. It really is trying to attract across the system, whether it's looking at advertising dollars or sponsorship dollars and spreading those dollars out, not just in the more favorable parks, but in other parks across the system. It is where there is a shortage in dollars, the city stepping in and spending its money on parks to make sure that there's equity. It's great to have a park that's within a 10-minute walk, but if you look at some of the parks that exist, they aren't fit to walk into. And so we have to make sure that there is equity across the system, that where those, in a number of places where we push P3s, in a number of ways those public-private partnerships, be able to use additional dollars and spread that out across a region or across a borough, but also look for other sponsorship opportunities for the private sector to be able to deal with our parks. But right now, it really is a second-class, there's so many parks that are treated as second-class citizens. We can't allow that to continue.
Let me get hands on one specific parks issue that's out there right now. There are some parks advocates in Queens who oppose the Major League Soccer Stadium proposal as more development versus open space and more commercial versus public space in Flushing Meadows, Corona Park. Can I see hands if people have firm positions on this? Is anybody solidly for the stadium? Nobody's going to take a solid position for the stadium. Is anybody solidly against the stadium? So who wants to, wait, Sal, you just spoke. John Liu, you want to talk about your ambivalence here?
Yeah. I think the ambivalence comes, look, when they talk about alienating parkland for a stadium, they always make promises of making sure that the parkland is restored in another different part of the borough or even the city. Unfortunately, under this administration, we have seen a couple of other stadiums that have been built, and the parks facilities and spaces not being made available to the public until a huge amount of public pressure was put bare on the administration. So there's a credibility factor here, and I think I certainly, in the case of the MLS, the Major League Soccer Stadium that's being proposed, and I do believe the administration is pushing it behind the scenes, I do not think overall it's a good idea because they haven't shown us exactly where they're going to restore the parkland. But overall, I think that, I would definitely agree with Bill that there's a huge difference in parkland in different parts of the city. And we've got to correct some of those inequities. And one thing we can do is hold concessionaires responsible and accountable for the promises that they made to the city taxpayers in exchange for being able to operate those concession stands, the concession businesses, in some cases very large grossing businesses. They have not, in many cases, lived up to the financial commitment of upkeeping those parks that they operate in.
Thank you very much. I want to move on to another issue. I said not everybody's going to get a shot on everything, and that is air quality and environmental justice. New York's air quality fails to meet federal standards for ozone and fine particulate matter, with pollution levels concentrated in mainly low-income neighborhoods. The health department reported last year that 1 in 8 children has asthma, but that rate is 17 or 18% for Black and Latino kids, 5% for white kids. So the question is, what is your plan to improve air quality throughout the city, especially in those communities where pollution-causing asthma is concentrated and those same community members are disproportionately affected? Bill de Blasio, you want to start on that?
Yeah, I happen to be an asthmatic myself, and mine's under control, but I can tell you, if you experience the disease, you understand when it's afflicting someone, it fundamentally undermines their life, their quality of life, and for children in particular, it's a tremendous danger, and what I feel like is it gets back to the point about buildings again, that the real opportunity here to change this city is with a extensive, pervasive approach to building retrofit. This is where we're going to have the big difference, and I think if you think about a policy of equity, focusing our efforts again on public housing developments helps us achieve both an important measure of environmental progress, but also an act of economic justice. Because this is in so many of the communities where you say there's disproportionate.
So what do you do?
You have aggressive financing mechanisms backed up in some cases by our public pension funds to continue to regularly retrofit buildings, and I say in a transparent manner because this is the point. There has to be a set of numerical goals that then can be held accountable by the public. But if you focus first on our public housing developments, you will have the advantage of affecting areas with the greatest health problems, and you create employment opportunity where there's the greatest unemployment problems.
So buildings would be the heart of that. Mr. McDonald, you want to take a shot at this?
Well, we have a totally integrated pest management company called Pest at Rest, and we have a contract with the health department, and we go into minority areas, and we show them how to fix their apartments so that the cockroaches stay out rather than come in. And, you know, that causes asthma. And it's just a little thing, but when you think about it and you think about public housing, I think that we could make great progress in public housing, for example, in stem asthma, through having quality pest management programs. And I want to say one other thing about going back to the parks, because if you go over to the Hudson River Park Trust right now, you'll see folks in blue uniforms with the dough fund on the back of it actually cleaning the park. And when I'm mayor, I'm going to take the folks who are laying around in the city homeless shelter system, and we're going to get another bang for our buck. We're going to put them to work, and we're going to clean up our parks. And we can do that because the people are looking for an opportunity. They don't want to lay around. They want to go to work. All we have to do is provide them an opportunity. And again, we'll get $2 back, $3 back for every dollar that we invest.
So we've heard building retrofits, pest control, including education. Anybody want to put another asthma control strategy on the table, Speaker?
Sure. I failed to recognize our Environmental Protection Chair, Jim Gennaro, is here. So I just wanted to take a second to do that and thank Jim for all of his work. A couple of other things. One, I think we need to move forward with expanding bus rapid transit, select bus service, expanding ferry service to give people more mass transit options. And we have clean ferries now, so that's a real step in the right direction. I think to reduce asthma, particularly in lower income neighborhoods, we need to remain committed to the solid waste management plan, which is going to use marine transfer stations to get trucks off of the road, particularly in neighborhoods that have suffered far too long. So I think that's a really important component. We need to make sure that our legislation phasing out number 6, the dirtiest fuel oil, gets fully implemented moving forward. We need to expand our use of biodiesel, and the Doe Fund has actually been very helpful with that, but in every way that we possibly can.
You mentioned facility siting. Who thinks there should be greater borough or neighborhood equity when it comes to solid waste management? Everybody think that needs to be redistributed? Staten Island got saddled with fresh kills for so long. The East 91st Street Waste Transfer Station would be the only one in Manhattan. Anybody want to talk about 91st Street and whether you have a position on it? Mr. Lhota?
In 2001, in connection with the closure of Fresh Kills, the 91st Street MTS was closed. It was determined that each borough would be on its own, and each borough is on its own. Manhattan's garbage, however, from 2 a.m. to 4:30 a.m. in the morning, its garbage is taken through the tunnels to New Jersey, where it goes to a waste management plant. It is wrong to open up the 91st Street MTS again. It is an environmental hazard to put it there. It should. There are 12 sanitation districts in Manhattan. 5 are going to go out through the MTS, and the remaining 7 we're going to still continue to go to New Jersey. It is 5 times less costly to do the New Jersey route, according to the Independent Budget Office, who I have never been a friend with. Anyway, just telling you that given where the costs are, we should do something that's environmentally sound. Putting garbage trucks through a park where 70,000 public school children go to play each and every year and each and every week is wrong. There should not be trucks going through there. And it does not. It is in no way, shape, or form environmental racism, as other people have said it is, because the fact is Manhattan garbage isn't going to go to another borough. It's going to New Jersey. Great.
Mr. Thompson, do you have a position on 91st Street?
I have been out to the site, as a matter of fact, a few weeks ago, and took a look and looked at the ramp between that would cut asphalt green in half. I've spoken to the residents of some of the housing authority developments that are out there also, and I have to admit them, and also looked at the flooding that occurred at that site and the cost escalation. Am I at a final position? No, but I will say that the more I see, the more I go out and take a look at that site, the more concern I have. I have major issues with the site right now, but at the same point, when you look at borough equity, you can't say just no, you have to look at other sites. And I think right now, that is one of the things that I'm doing also.
Anybody leaning toward it as of right now?
Leaning
Nobody
towards
leaning
it?
toward 91st Street?
I'm beyond leaning, I'm there.
You're there.
Yeah,
You
I'm
said
there.
that before, yes.
I'm against it, and my two grandchildren play on asphalt green.
The great mayor, Fiorello LaGuardia, once said about delivering municipal services that there's no Democratic or Republican way to pick up the garbage. So we just heard a little taste of how true that is in 2013. On another aspect of that, Mayor Bloomberg made a State of the City address promise this year to double the city's recycling rate to 30% by 2017, which was an interesting choice of date because it kind of puts it on one of you guys, probably. So does everyone here promise to see that through, 30% recycling in 2017 as a campaign promise tonight? Hands?
It's too low. It's gotta be
Everybody was
higher.
talking about that earlier. You can get it up even higher. And he's had a lot of success in the last few years, so it looks like, actually hasn't, it's only at 15% now. It's very low.
It's
but you can
terrible.
get it higher.
Yeah, but Brian, just to be clear, there has to be a real commitment to electronics recycling, which I don't think has been. There has not been a commitment to composting, which we can do in this city. No. And I think we have to be clear. The mayor, I give him a lot of respect for environmentalism, obviously, but he's been on again, off again about recycling. It's undercut the momentum of our recycling program. So not only do you need a 30% goal, you need to stick with recycling so it can actually build momentum, and it has to pervade every part of our society, including electronics, including in public buildings, including composting, make it a way of life, in fact.
We're going to run out of time soon, and I want to make sure that I get to a question on regulation. And I'm going to start with the Republicans on this and Mr. Carrión. As a general principle, the National Republican Party often criticizes environmentalists as anti-business and as overly chicken little on the resilience of the earth. In the Republican presidential debates, denouncing the EPA was a staple. To what extent would you share that view? Would you say you share that view, Mr. Lhota, as it pertains to New York City?
I don't share that view whatsoever with the National Party. I not only disagree with them on social issues, I disagree with them on environmental issues. And I think the party itself has lost its way tremendously. It was President Teddy Roosevelt who created the national parklands. It was, believe it or not, Richard Nixon who created EPA. The fact of the matter is, done properly, environmental and efforts and sustainability can also be about new jobs, new technologies, and expanding the economy. That's the absolute direction we have to go in.
Mr. Catsimatidis, same question.
I believe the New York City Republican Party is different than the National Party. I believe in recycling. I believe we should do everything for all our elders. We should do everything for all our people. I've urged the Republican Party to have their own caucus in the entire Northeast.
And Mr. McDonald?
I'm interested in being mayor of the city of New York, and I'm not interested in leading any political party. I believe that the record that I have over these past 25 years demonstrates what my political philosophy is, and that's about empowering people, creating jobs, And certainly we've recycled human beings, and during the process of that, we've made large parts of New York City cleaner and safer.
Okay.
So that's my party.
So, Mr. Carrión, as no longer a Democrat for this race, somebody who was seeking the Republican nomination and running as an Independence Party candidate, I'll assume you agree with the general thrust of what we just heard. Are there any environmental laws or regulations that you think are currently too onerous on city businesses, or that should be scaled back because they're excessive in any way?
Brian, this is precisely why I'm running as an independent, because for too long, politicians have been pandering and have been playing to party loyalty and party dogma and not to where the people are, which are far ahead of the politicians. The public policy needs to be driven by the public interest. And as it relates to environmental policy, our goals should be sustainability, energy efficiency. It should be about ensuring that we build a better city that is more sustainable, user-friendly, and prepared for future generations. And you know what? There is an economic development element in this that cannot be missed. We have the opportunity to create new industries that are in fact global industries, and we have the ability to create an economic engine that can absorb a prepared workforce that we can deliver from a reformed New York City school system.
No environmental regulatory overreach in the city that
I
you would
think that we
identify.
need to continue to build a sustainable city and make it user-friendly for people and certainly for the environment.
All right. The very final question will be on transportation before you get your closing statements of 2 minutes each. And I wonder if I could see hands. And of course, we saw Mayor Bloomberg lose his battle for congestion pricing in New York City. Does everyone believe, as a general principle, that there are too many cars driving in Manhattan below 59th Street today, and that as mayor you should address this in some way? Hands, everybody? Except Mr. Catsimatidis. And I'm
I
reluctant
tell the truth.
Say again?
I tell the truth.
And I'm reluctant to even mention the word well, what is the truth? The truth is it doesn't matter, in your opinion. The truth is the current...
Well, I don't necessarily tell the audience what they want to hear. That's
Okay.
the truth.
And I'm reluctant to even mention the word bicycles, but without debating specific bike lanes, can I ask for hands on this as a general principle? Who would like to have more bicycle commuting than we have today by the end of your first 4 years? Bicycle commuting specifically. And with that, you'll be happy to know I'm finished asking questions. You've been watching a mayoral candidates forum on environmental sustainability and the future of New York that took place on Monday night, April 22nd, Earth Day, at the Great Hall of Cooper Union. See you next week at this time. And check out my radio show weekdays at 10 a.m. on WNYC 93.9 FM and AM 820. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.